Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cpa Alliance's Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership, or ORLP, Technical Assistance Webinar. I'm Julie Waterman, and I'm the Advocacy Director at City Parks Alliance. I know that everyone attending this webinar is interested in learning how to access federal park funds for their own local park projects, and it is our goal to help guide you through that process. City Parks Alliance is a nationwide network of urban leaders from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, community-based organizations, and philanthropy, focusing on the intersection between parks and other critical urban infrastructure to build equitable and healthy cities. Our vision is that everyone in urban America will have access to the benefits of parks, recreational opportunities, and green spaces. City Parks Alliance, with our partners, the National Park Service, National League of Cities, National Recreation and Park Association, and the Trust for Public Land, is excited to host this ORLP webinar. Support for this work is provided by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I would like to introduce and share our gratitude to our guest presenters from the National Park Service, Elizabeth Fondries and Ginger Carter, who will give the main presentation. I would also like to introduce Stephanie Flynn from the Trust for Public Land, who has assisted public agencies in applying for ORLP grants and can provide some helpful advice during the question and answer period. Established in 2014, the ORLP is a nationally competitive grant program funded through the Land and Water Conservation Fund that focuses on economically disadvantaged communities with little to no access to outdoor recreation opportunities in urban areas. Under the current grant round, the National Park Service has $192 million available for land acquisition, new park development, or the substantial renovation of existing parks, all with the goal to reconnect people with the outdoors. During this hour-and-a-half technical assistance webinar, National Park Service staff will provide details on applicant and project eligibility, give tips on writing a strong ORLP application, explain the application and selection process, and answer questions. The Department of Interior has made a few requirement changes for this current round, and Elizabeth and Ginger will go over those changes. Just a heads up that they will be covering a lot of material in some detail, so hang in there. We will be breaking up the presentation with a few question and answer periods following some slides, and then if there's time, we will answer additional questions at the end of the presentation. You may want to hold off on some of your questions until further in the presentation because Ginger and Elizabeth will probably cover it. We have provided you with 4 helpful items that you can find in your control panel. They include the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, the LWCF State Assistance Program Manual, a document showing the ORLP requirement changes for this current grant round, and an application checklist. We'll also include a new ORLP toolkit from the Trust for Public Land, and we'll include that link. In the follow-up email, we'll also send you the presentation and an FAQ fact sheet. We have a great turnout today, over close to 600, and to ensure we can respond to everyone as questions or technical difficulties arise, here are some tips. To ask a question, click on the questions icon on your GoToWebinar control panel. Type the question in the box and click send. You will be able to send questions throughout the presentation, but again, you may want to make a note of the question and see if it's answered before submitting it. If you experience a technical problem during the presentation, please type it in the question box and send it to us. If you missed something, don't worry. Links to today's recording, the presentation, and related resources will be emailed to all registrants. Okay, let's get started. Elizabeth and Ginger, take it away.
Okay. So while they hand off the slideshow, Ginger and I are going to have our cameras off during the presentation to make it a little easier for you guys to focus on our slides. But we will come back on again during the Q&As. So starting out here, thank you everyone for joining. And for any of our participants who also joined us last Thursday, this is a deeper dive, as Julie was explaining. So, but there is some overlap in the slides, so I apologize in advance for that. But hopefully, it just helps deepen your understanding of the program. So, go ahead, Ginger. Okay, so we want to spend a few slides first highlighting the overall state assistance program, covering both the formula grant program and ORLP. This is because if you find after listening to our presentation that your jurisdiction does not qualify or your project doesn't align that well with the ORLP's objectives, we want to be sure that you know funding for your project may be available to you from your state's formula funding grants. The Land and Water Conservation Fund State Assistance Program was enacted in 1964, in fact, just this last week or so on September the 3rd, to assist in preserving, developing, and assuring accessibility to outdoor recreation resources. Under the National Park Service's stateside program, this is accomplished by allocating funds to each state, DC, and the territories using a formula outlined in the LWCF Act. States have the lead for competitions and selecting the projects for funding, with applications coming to the Park Service for final action. Passage of the John Dingell Conservation, Management, and Recreation Act in 2019 and the Great American Outdoors Act in 2020 secured mandatory and permanent annual LWCF funding at the fully authorized level of $900 million. Of this amount, the stateside program is slated to get at least 40% or $360 million. The LWCF also funds acquisitions by the 4 federal land management agencies, as well as other financial assistance programs such as American Battlefields Protection, Forest Legacy, and Cooperative Endangered Species. The Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, or ORLP program, is an adjunct effort to the stateside program and was initiated at the request of Congress in 2014. It's not authorized on its own and relies on an annual allocation of funding from Congress through the appropriations process. Currently, it's being carved out from the state assistance funds, so it is run similarly to the formula grant program under the requirements of the LWCF Act. However, it is distinct from it in that grants are available only for projects in cities with larger populations, and the projects must be within walking distance of and serve low-income communities that lack any or have almost no publicly available outdoor recreation. Each competitive round will also have a focus based on the administration's current priorities. Even though it's not authorized, the ORLP has benefited from the increased funding made available from the LWCF, starting out at funding levels of just $3 million in 2014 and 2015, but now receiving over $100 million in both 2021 and 2022. So understanding how the LWCF Formula Grant Program operates is key to understanding how ORLP operates. The Park Service and each state's lead agency for LWCF are partners in implementing these programs. Per the LWCF Act, all grants must be matched dollar for dollar with non-federal resources, which can be in the form of cash or in-kind contributions of services, supplies, equipment, or land. Also as specified in the Act, the state lead agency for LWCF is the only allowable applicant for either a formula or ORLP grant. However, they may pass through these grant funds to a local entity such as a city. LWCF and ORLP grants can be used to acquire and/or develop land for public outdoor recreation. All manner of outdoor recreation sites are eligible, from local, regional, or state parks to sports complexes to trails, etc. In addition, a wide variety of recreation facilities are eligible, supporting activities like hiking, camping, picnicking, walking, biking, field and court sports, pools. I like to say basically if your project is outside and you can play on it, it's probably eligible. The funds can also be used for supportive facilities such as restrooms or infrastructure like lighting or parking, but they do have to be part of a larger project to develop recreation facilities. Because the overall goal of ORLP is to address the needs of communities that lack recreation opportunities, unlike formula grants, ORLP projects must specifically focus on increasing active public outdoor recreation. So for example, if a project is largely focused on supporting an indoor facility such as a visitor center, that would not be eligible for ORLP, although such a facility could be eligible for a formula grant. Similarly, projects focused on facilities designed to support non-outdoor recreation uses of a park, such as markets or demonstration farms or trails that are really more for transportation than recreation, are not considered as consistent with ORLP program goals. There are a couple other key requirements to know about the LWCF Act. To be eligible, each state, DC and the territories, must prepare and maintain a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, or Scorp. These 5-year plans identify recreation needs in the state and help set the direction for the use of the LWCF funds. ORLP projects must address at least one priority recreation need as identified in their state's current Scorp, along with the ORLP priorities and any further priorities of the administration. Another key feature of the LWCF Act is the Perpetuity Provision. Any park or other recreation area that receives assistance from the LWCF must be maintained for outdoor recreation use forever. The Act provides only one method to lift this restriction, and that's to replace the converted park or area with new recreation property of at least equal fair market value and reasonably equivalent recreation, utility, and location. Potential project sponsors should consider their ability and willingness to comply with this provision of the law before applying for grants, whether that's formula grants or ORLP. And we'll examine the extent of the area, the protection in the next slide. Projects assisted with funding, as I said, whether formula or ORLP, the perpetual use requirements apply to the park as a whole and not just on the specific area or facilities that we assisted with the funds. There are a couple of exceptions, but they are considered only if the park in question can stand alone, and this means that its borders do not adjoin other areas of the park, and also that it's self-sustaining, meaning it does not rely on adjoining park areas for access, utilities, support facilities, etc. It really should be a distinct unit. If we're talking about trail projects, then the boundaries must include other public recreation sites that the site support, that the trail supports, or butts, or anything like that. So for example, if a proposed trail begins or ends at a park, the park would have to be included within the protected boundary. I'm now going to hand it off to Ginger for a little bit to get more into the mechanics of the program.
All right, so the Orlp program goal and purpose are to directly connect people with outdoor recreation by creating new or substantially rehabilitating parks or other outdoor recreation areas that are walking accessible to and serve urban communities that are park deserts or have large numbers of people in poverty. In the next few slides, we'll describe how the ORLP defines whether a project meets these goals. The current grant round, which includes several changes from past rounds, so please note the items shown in red and noted with the word new within this presentation. As previously mentioned, the proposed project must align with one of the priorities of the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. The Scorp is available from your state, and a link to the list of state contact agencies is provided later in this presentation, and it's also available in the funding opportunity. The urban community served by the project must be within a city, an incorporated city or town having a population of 30,000 or more per the 2020 US Census. This is a change from past rounds where the population minimum was 50,000 and the urban community had to be located within an official census-designated urban area. There's a continued requirement that projects must serve an economically disadvantaged community, which in round 6 is specifically limited to a community within a census tract having a poverty level of at least 20% or a rate that is at least 10% above the rate of the city, county, and state. In past rounds, the Orlp program prioritized communities with a poverty rate of 20% or above, but did not set a minimum. Because of this, many proposals we received focused on communities with relatively low levels of poverty, or the application didn't provide a poverty level at all, but rather provided other community statistics, such as percent of youth, minorities, seniors, or people with disabilities. Although these other groups may help to improve the overall benefits of a project, please keep in mind that the project must first meet the recreation wants and needs of the community meeting the 20% poverty minimum. The project sites must be accessible by foot and be within walking distance of the economically disadvantaged community. Walking distance is considered to be a half mile or a 10-minute walk. Location issues such as requiring that park users cross a major highway or use a car or public transportation to access the site could lead to the project being eliminated. ORLP projects must be located in an area that can be described as a park desert. And we're going to look at how this is defined in the next slide. A park desert is an area where there is no or almost no existing publicly available outdoor recreation. So this means that the community has no existing parks within a half-mile radius of the communities to be served by the park. And so it has to be within the half-mile of the community, not a half-mile radius of any existing parks. Or the community has to have 1 or 2 small parks within a 5-mile radius of the communities that are not large enough to support the size of the population of the service area, or otherwise unable to provide a variety of recreational opportunities. Or the community may have 1 or 2 existing parks and potentially of adequate size, including the park that is being addressed in the project, that are so obsolete or underdeveloped that a major redevelopment or rehabilitation is necessary to be able to significantly increase the number of people or user groups who could be served in a way that would be equivalent to a new park. Renovations in particular must be substantial, not simply replacing existing facilities with new versions or adding 1 or 2 new features to a park that already has a lot of opportunities. Fourth, the community may have existing parks that are inaccessible to the target community due to physical barriers such as transportation infrastructure, rivers, etc. These would also be considered park deserts. We'll look at some examples on the next slide. The image on the left shows a park desert. There are no existing parks within a 1-mile radius of the target community. In comparison, the images on the right-hand side of the slide show areas where there are either many existing parks, such as in the image in the upper right, or where there exists a very large park already serving the local area, as shown in the lower right. Neither of these areas would be considered park deserts. Most projects would fall somewhere in between these 2 extremes, but the recreation area for your project should be much more like the image on the left. Additionally, your application should describe the deficiency in available parkland. Note that a lack of specific recreational opportunity in an otherwise adequate supply of parks is not considered a park desert. So here are some of the basics for round 6. The full notice of funding opportunity can be found on grants.gov by searching under opportunity number P22AS00645. Unlike in past rounds, in round 6, there are 2 optional application due dates. We've named these 6A and 6B. Round 6A has a deadline of January 31st, 2023. Applications submitted in this round will compete only against other applications submitted under round 6A. Round 6B applications are due by May 31st, 2023, and will only compete against applications submitted under this round. The 6th round of Orlp will make available up to $103 million appropriated by Congress in fiscal year 2022, plus unused funds from prior years, which totaled $89 million. So that leaves a total of $192 million available in round 6. Because states must complete their in-state competition and selection process and work with the selected recipients to prepare a full application to submit to NPS, their application deadlines will be earlier than the NPS application deadlines. Please reach out to your state's lead agency to find out about their selection requirement process and timeline for receiving and selecting projects. Again, a list of LWCF lead agencies can be found on the LWCF website shown in this slide. And you will get a copy of this presentation, so you'll be able to download that address once you receive that. And it's also in the funding opportunity. Beyond basic Orlp goals and eligibility requirements, governmental administrations can opt to layer in their own priorities to grant programs. The current administration is focused on environmental justice and addressing climate change. Consequently, the round 6 competition will prioritize projects that provide new recreational opportunities, particularly those that will increase access to nature's benefits, such as green spaces, shady areas, natural landscapes that help cool the air and reduce urban heat island effects, that help reduce pollution, and have positive effects on mental and physical health. Also, projects that engage members of the target community in the project development and design. Projects that create or expand public-private partnerships that leverage matching share resources, such as cash or donations of land, supplies, or services. Projects that benefit from a high degree of coordination among the public, multiple levels of government, and the private sector. And projects that advance goals of or meet priority recreation needs identified in numerous local, regional, or state plans or initiatives. The project sponsor is the eventual subrecipient of an Orlp grant. Eligible subrecipients include state or local government agencies, including special purpose districts, and federally recognized Indian tribes. If the subrecipient is a county or special purpose district, the project must be serving a community within the city or town of 30,000 or more people, and the park or recreation area must be within or abutting that city or town. Special purpose districts, such as a park district, or another one that includes acquisition, development, and maintenance of parks within its mission, are eligible subrecipients. However, this type of project sponsor should ensure that they are able to comply with the requirement to maintain the site for recreation purposes in perpetuity. Individuals, nonprofits, and other private organizations are not eligible to apply for or be a recipient of an LWCF or Orlp grant as per the LWCF Act. However, it's important to note that projects involving partnerships with the private sector that result in direct financial or in-kind contributions to the project are counted as part of the project sponsor's matching share and are prioritized. And we are going to stop here for a few questions. And Jolie, if you could lead us in that.
Hi, everyone again. Elizabeth has been doing such a great job of answering the questions on the spot. So we had quite a few in there, but they've been answered. The last one that I have was, what is the timeline for review of the January applications versus May? And when do you anticipate funding becoming available for both rounds if selected?
We do get to that in the next section, so we can skip that for now. But yeah, just to follow up on the questions that we got. I mean, the poverty rate and the even the population, it's always a tricky thing because there's always going to be someone who's just under our limits, whether it's having 29,900 people or just under the poverty rate. So that is why we we put out the talk about the formula of funding as well, because we want to make sure that that's an alternative with no population requirements or poverty rate requirements. So don't don't fret too much if you don't quite meet the standards here.
Great, and I have one more question. When calculating the distance from an existing park, do you count from the geographic boundary of existing parks or the geographic center of those parks?
I don't think we have to be that specific. Yeah, if they can walk there, so obviously you're going to have communities on all sides of the park. So I'd say, if you're going from the edge of the park to wherever the community is, you're safe.
Yeah, sounds great. They're all coming in now. I represent a nonprofit. How many nonprofits can partner with a state agency?
Well, we do like to see a lot of partner organizations, but the city would still be the actual applicant. That, if you have 4 nonprofits partnering, that looks great.
Yeah, there's not a limit.
To confirm, the 20% poverty level for the target community served can represent a broader area, i.e. a composite census tract for neighborhoods of a certain distance from the park, e.g. a 10-minute walk?
You still have to identify the community within the census block, and the park should be a half-mile walk from that community. But just so that we have a reliable standard source of information, we use the census tracts as the poverty rate. That is the lowest level that they get to in the census. So that is why we are using that particular site as a reference.
Got it. Can you clarify the requirement that county projects must be located in cities? What about unincorporated urban areas?
So the city or town does have to be incorporated to be an eligible applicant. And a county can apply, but they have to be applying for a project that still meets the requirement of being within a city with a population of 30,000 people or more.
Great. We have a lot more questions coming in about nonprofits, and I just want to say again that nonprofits can't apply directly, but they can work with their public agency. They can partner with their public agency, and again, NPS ranks those proposals higher if there are good partnerships. So again, nonprofits cannot apply directly, but they can work with their public agency to do that. Let's see, you mentioned outdoor facility. What if an outdoor facility is covered with fields, with covered fields? What if it's an outdoor facility with covered fields?
You mean like
a
covered tennis court? Indoor facilities would not be allowable. But when we talk about allowable facilities, we're talking about support facilities, which could be restrooms or storage sheds, things like that, that are supporting the outdoor activities of the park.
Good. We're going to do a couple more and then we're going to get back onto our presentation. But Elizabeth can continue to answer these in the chat as well, or in the question bar. If the site is within existing park, which is degraded, does it mean that the park desert criterion?
If the park is degraded to the point where the public is not using it, yes, that still counts as a park desert, because if that is your only park and people cannot use it as it's meant to be used, then they lack access to a park. Yes.
Yeah, so if it is an existing park, I mean, it has to be, like, the park as a whole needs to be sort of fairly obsolete and degraded, and the goal of the project has to be to address that. So it's not just like one facility within a larger park that's otherwise okay.
Great. This is going to be our last question for this part. I think this is always a good question. Can the grant apply to a phased project?
Yes, you can apply for a phase of a project, and when we kind of address this in the next section, that you definitely want the application to focus on the phase that you are funding, and whatever we are funding has to be able to work as an outdoor recreation area itself. It cannot rely on any further phases. But again, we will be addressing that.
Great. Okay, we're starting to get into questions that you're going to be addressing. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Ginger.
Okay, so we are going to start by looking at the criteria for round 6. There are 6 review criteria in which the proposed projects are scored, totaling 100 points. In the next 2 slides, we'll quickly review each of these. Criterion 1 is the extent of outdoor recreation and economic needs and is worth 20 points. To support the need for the project, you must explain the extent of deficiency based on quantity or quality of outdoor recreation opportunities within walking distance of the economically disadvantaged community, and explain how the project will directly benefit them. Top scoring projects will be in areas most severely lacking in recreational opportunities and where poverty levels are highest. Criterion 2 is appropriateness of the project to meet needs and nature's benefits and is worth 20 points. To support why the project is the right project at the right time, you must explain how the proposed project addresses the needs identified in the first criteria. Priority will be given to projects that result in the most significant increase in the number of people or user types served, and those that offer increased access to nature and other green spaces to provide benefits such as reducing the urban heat island effect. Criterion 3 is community involvement and support, and is worth 20 points. To support strong community engagement, you must document significant, meaningful involvement in the project's development and design by the economically disadvantaged community, along with others in the local community and partners. Support can also be shown through contributions of cash, land, equipment, and time, etc., as well as through general letters of support, particularly from the local community groups and project partners. Criterion 4 is new parks and innovative attributes. This is worth 10 points. To fulfill the LWCF Act purpose of increasing the quantity and quality of outdoor recreation resources, new parks and parks that have not benefited from prior assistance through an Orlp grant, an LWCF formula grant, an urban park and recreation recovery grant, or through the federal Lands to Parks program will be given preference. Please note that your state can help you identify if your site has received any of these types of assistance in the past. Additionally, projects that include innovative or transformational attributes will be scored higher. This could include adaptive reuse of a previously developed site, such as a former landfill or industrial site, or plans to install interesting new recreation opportunities or features that will help engage new or broader communities. Other innovations could relate to the direct economic benefits to the local target community through shorter long-term jobs or increased patronage of local businesses. The next two criteria are more technical in nature. Criterion 5 is aligning with goals of the Scorp and other plans and is worth 10 points. The project must support at least one priority of the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. While somewhat out of the applicant's control, projects in states that have specific Scorp priorities that relate to the Orlp goals, such as improving recreational opportunities for underserved communities or serving urban communities, also score better. More points are attained if the proposed project also meets or furthers goals of priorities in additional plans. The proposal should briefly describe how the project furthers each priority or plan listed. Criterion 6 is project feasibility and likelihood of success and is worth 20 points. This criterion encompasses many aspects. To support that the project is feasible and likely to succeed, the applicant must include a clear and detailed timeline to planned project tasks and milestones. Projects should be past the community engagement, planning, and design stages, and otherwise be close to being ready to be put out for bid. The application should document the applicant's and any partner's experience with federal grants, comparable projects, implementation, and the ability to physically and financially maintain the site after the project's completion. Priority will be given to projects that, 1, show support from non-public sources by leveraging some or all of the required matching share. 2, those that can break ground within 1 year and will be complete and open to the public within 2 to 3 years. 3, that are managed by project sponsors and partners with proven experience in successfully managing similar projects with no problems. And 4, that can demonstrate a clear capacity and plan for successful long-term park management protection. Though the budget is not scored as part of this criterion, it will be considered a deciding factor in selection. If the budget is insufficiently detailed or contains unreasonable, unnecessary, or unallowable costs, and or does not align with the technical scope of the proposal, it could result in the project not being recommended for selection. Finally, the matching share must be documented as fully secured or fully committed and supported in letters of commitment from the sponsor or donor that specifies the type and value of the donation. Now we're going to look at the application process. So the state is the primary and only eligible applicant to the NPS National Orlp competition. As the applicant, the state follows its competitive process to solicit and select projects from eligible project sponsors to be nominated to the national competition. As previously stated, communities considering applying to the state should contact their state lead agency as soon as the state's proposal deadline. And should contact their state lead agency as early as possible, as the state's proposed deadline will be earlier than the NPS's deadline. Proposals submitted directly to NPS by project sponsors will not be considered by the National Park Service. Unlike in past Orlp rounds, which required that only an abbreviated application be submitted, and where selected projects were invited to submit full and final applications for further NPS review, Round 6 requires that a full and final application be submitted by the state to the NPS competition. This process requires more upfront work by the state and project sponsor, but also results in the selected projects being written into grant agreements immediately upon selection. Once all applications are received, the NPS conducts a review of the applications. Based on that review, a list of recommended projects is submitted to the NPS director for selection, and if approved, these projects are written into grant agreements. We'll look at the NPS review process in more detail in the next slide. The NPS review process includes many steps. Upon receipt of the application, NPS will conduct an initial review to determine whether the applicant is eligible for an award, that all required application elements have been submitted, that all mandatory requirements of the NOPO are satisfied, such as was it submitted through grants.gov by the applicable state agency and by the due date, and that the project proposed is responsive to the program objectives of Orlp. This would include determining if the community is actually in a park desert, if the proposed park is walking accessible, that the target community meets the minimum poverty level. If an applicant clearly fails to meet the requirements and objectives stated in the funding opportunity, or does not provide sufficient information for review, the applicant will be considered non-responsive and eliminated from further review. All applications that satisfactorily pass the initial review will then go through a comprehensive technical and merit review in accordance with the evaluation criteria and rating scale stated in the funding opportunity. This review will be a thorough, consistent, and objective examination of applications based on the evaluation criteria stated in the funding opportunity. Panel members review and score applications individually. Then they meet as a panel to discuss the project. Reviewers may adjust their score if they hear something in the panel meeting that affects their opinion of the project, either making the project stronger or weaker. However, reviewers are not required to come to a consensus on their scores. Their scores for each project will be averaged, and the final scores will be used to determine a ranked order of applications from strongest to weakest. Simultaneously to the merit review process, NPS staff will review the project for compliance with federal laws, most notably compliance with the LWC Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, and federal and program budget requirements. If these reviews reveal features of the project that affect its ability or viability, the NPS may remove the project from the competition. A budget evaluation, again, is not done by the panel review, but is conducted after the panel review meeting, and only on the applications that rank highest. The budget evaluation serves as a method to see how many of the highest ranked projects can be funded out of the available pool of funding, as well as a check of the budget estimates, appropriateness, and reasonableness, and relative to the resources and the statement of work. Although the budget evaluation does not affect the proposal's technical score, again, it can be considered as a deciding factor in the selection of the projects. Additionally, unlike with state formula grants, substantive changes to the scope of work and budget in general cannot be accommodated under Orlp, as they may materially alter the circumstances under which the project was evaluated and selected. These kind of changes can lead to the federal share of the grant being offered being reduced or the grant offer being entirely withdrawn. One major change to round 6 is that a full LWC application is required to ensure that NPS has all the information required to fully review the project and be able to award funds immediately upon selection. 22 application elements are identified in the funding opportunity. However, some of these are optional, and some projects require additional documents based on the particulars of the project. The state will assist the project sponsor in determining the application elements that are necessary for their project. We've included templates for the required project narrative, budget narrative, and a form for photos, and hosted them with the funding opportunity on grants.gov. These forms can be accessed on the Related Documents tab of the funding opportunity page. We've also provided an application checklist so that you can ensure that the forms required of all applicants are included in your application. Here we're going to look at some ways to avoid major application issues and then help ensure that your proposed proposal stands out. So first, we want to make sure that you read the funding opportunity completely. It's long and it's technical, but if you read through it and highlight important information and then review it again before submitting your application, you're more likely to ensure that you've addressed all the requirements of the current competition. Just remember that nothing says I didn't read the funding opportunity than responding to a past year's criteria or omitting required materials that are under round 6. The project narrative and budget should focus on the part of the project that would be funded by an Orlp grant if awarded. Often proposals are for one phase or a smaller portion of a larger project. Though it may be necessary to explain the larger project for context, the emphasis of the proposal should be the smaller project. This is true when describing the expected benefits as well. Many proposals tout the expected outcomes of the entire effort, even if the larger effort is still speculative or is for something that's not eligible, like a large indoor recreation or community center. This could dampen the project scores if reviewers assume that this means the Orlp project is not impactful or not the focus of the effort. Include all required elements in your application. This is extremely important because an incomplete application will result in the NPS not having the necessary information to enable us to complete a full review within the review period. Plans and drawings should be at the point where the proposed scope of work and estimated budget are mostly locked in. This means that planning and design are in the final stages, and any federal permits required, such as by the U.S. Army Corps, are at least applied for or in hand. States will also initiate consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office in Section 1 for the 106 process, so that the NPS can complete all compliance reviews within the limited review period. Be clear and honest. When responding to the criteria, make each point understandable to someone completely unfamiliar with the project. Be candid and open about problems and provide realistic plans to address those issues. If any required information is omitted, explain why and when you expect to have the information. Support declarative statements. Backup statements of fact with data or citations of where or how the information was obtained. As an example, provide details of the community engagement activities conducted and how it led to the proposed project design. Provide dates of community meetings and the number of attendees, or provide the number of responses to a public survey, and or include letters of support from the community to show that they were actively involved in the design. Do not simply state that public outreach was completed and that the project responds to the community's needs. Provide consistent information. Make sure that the information provided in each part of the application aligns with all other parts. This is particularly true with budget information. State lead agencies should review the budget that's listed on the SF-424 and SF-424C and in the budget narrative to ensure that all are reporting the same information prior to submitting. Additionally, the narrative must describe the project as detailed in the budget and vice versa. If the budget is for a small part of a larger project, but the narrative focuses on the larger project, reviewers will not be able to determine if the budget is appropriate. Finally, keep the reviewers in mind. Reviewers will evaluate only the information in the application. Don't expect reviewers to have time to do further research by following a hyperlink to referenced sources. Don't assume that reviewers are familiar with your organization, your state, county, city, or acronyms that may be common to you. And don't overwhelm reviewers with excess information or try to hide issues by using vague language. Remember, they may be reviewing 60 or more proposals. The harder you make it for them to understand your project, the lower your proposal will score. All right, we're going to stop again for some more questions because that was a lot of information.
Okay, and again, Elizabeth is doing a great job of going through those questions. Ginger, do you know if all states have a current Scorp?
Elizabeth would be better to answer that.
Just about. We have a couple with us that that need to be signed off as approved, but I don't think there's any. Well, maybe I think the Virgin Islands is not compliant right now. It doesn't have a Scorp right now, but almost everyone else does. So.
Great, good. That's good news. Question on when the grants will be awarded. Do you intend to award all the grants for 6A and 6B by the end of FY 2023?
Well, the idea is that if they are selected, we should be able to put them into grant agreements right away. So those selected under round 6A should be able to be written into grants around September 1st, 2023, and those under 6B should be written into grants around January 1st, 2024.
What was that second time? What was that?
For round 6B, they should be written into grants around January 1st, 2024.
Each review period is about seven months.
And this one I think you covered, but just want to make sure the match needs to be fully secured or committed by the time the applicant submits in round 6A and 6B. Is that correct?
It should be fairly secure by the time it's the application submitted. It does have to be in hand by the time it's awarded. We can't write a grant unless you have the matching share.
This comes up a lot. Our ARPA funds, can they be used as the match contribution?
So we have a better answer in our frequently asked questions, just because I keep screwing up the name. But there's, as we understand it, Treasury, identified 4 use categories for the ARPA funds, and only the one that is replacing lost government revenue is eligible to be used as match. The other 3 are not.
Great. Is there a requirement for states to have permission to upload applications to grants.gov like there is for the standard formula grants?
Yes, they have to be registered in grants.gov and in sam.gov.
Great. There's a city park, a small lot with a bench and some trees that is called a park, but not really have any recreational activities, considered a park desert.
Is the park considered a park desert? I guess I'm confused. If it's a community that they're looking to put in just a small park with some benches, if there's no parks and that's what the community would like, just a place to sit and have a picnic, that's fine.
Great.
That
Doesn't necessarily have to have a recreational goal, basically, I think the person is asking.
Well, picnicking would
Hope
still be
that.
recreation, yes.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be playing soccer. It could be a more passive recreation. But if they're saying that is it a city and all they have is a small park with a bench, then they could say that they are a park desert if they are proposing a park that provides a lot of additional recreational opportunities that would invite many more people in the community or other user groups to use the park.
Perfect. Getting through all of them. Is there a difference between poverty and low poverty?
Just the poverty rate, that's how census lists it. So that's what you're going to be looking for when, and in the NOFO, we actually direct you what to the website, the census website to use to find the census tract poverty level. So you don't have to guess to where to find it. Just if you look in the NOFO under the project narrative, there is a page that is called the project data page, and it will direct you exactly to that website. So, and tell you how to enter the information so you get the poverty level.
Great. And one last question, and this is probably all in your materials as well, but can we get a list of all the required supporting documentation to pass the environmental historic review? Do we have a letter that's required footplane map? It's recommended but not required.
We are actually sharing something like that with the states because they are the ones who will be working with you on the final application information. And again, each project will be different, so they will look through our list of recommendations and then they can let you know exactly what has to be submitted for your project.
Great, that will be our last question for this section. I do want to say back to the nonprofits, if you have a park project that you really want to work on and want to work with a public agency, Stephanie Flynn, one of our presenters on this webinar, would be happy to talk to you and guide you in that process. I'm going to hand it back to Ginger to complete the presentation.
Okay, actually, Elizabeth is going to bring last few
Elizabeth.
slides.
Okay. So we are sort of entering the home stretch. So since I was answering the questions, there'll be a pause on question answering at the moment. So so we did want to just focus on a couple different project types that that we've seen that pose some sort of unusual questions or sort of special circumstances. And so one is trail projects. So funds can be used for the development of land or water-based trails, as we've said, but they do primarily need to be for outdoor recreation activities. So again, you know, walking, hiking, bicycling, riding, you know, sort of things like that. And the trails can connect parks with the communities, or be among two parks or within parks, or stand alone. But again, the goal really has to be sort of the recreation. So so trails that are for other purposes, like primarily for commuting or things like that, that's not what we're trying to do with this program. Another thing is, especially for connecting trails that are outside of parks, they're often sort of part of larger systems, larger trail systems. So I think it is sometimes challenging for sponsors to sort of explain how these projects benefit the target low-income community. So that needs to be, sort of still a feature of that project. So how the trail meets the needs of that community is desired by that community, and not sort of a more passive benefit of like, well, it goes past them. So so it really still needs to be connected to that community's needs and wants. And as we sort of explaining earlier in the presentation, another important consideration is what's included in the proposed protected boundary. So so if the goal of the project is to connect two parks, the parks need to be part of the boundary as well. Going through abutting sort of things like that. So it's not just the trail corridor specifically. Anyway, and then also if it is an overall sort of connecting trail that is part of a larger system, then there needs to be enough of it protected that it makes for a meaningful recreation experience. And so it can't just be like the half miles say feeder trail that gets you to the larger system. It would have to be more of the larger system then. Another thing to keep in mind is that is that common unallowable costs are sort of non-capital improvement costs. So we don't things that are a little more kind of maintenance oriented or operation oriented, like trail counters or work outside of the actual boundary. So for example, if there has to be a street crosswalk or something like that, anything outside that would be outside the park's boundary is also not eligible for funding. So next slide, please. School parks, and I'll preface this by saying that not every state does allow school parks, so that is something that that you need to check with your state. But public outdoor recreation areas and facilities, can be, when they are sort of for coordinated use by the general public and a public school, whether that's a elementary or can include public colleges and universities. They can be eligible for LWCF assistance, provided the facilities are not part of the normal and usual program and responsibility of the educational institution. So that doesn't mean that the exclusive school use is not precluded, at certain times or days, such as like the athletic fields or tennis courts, if they're needed during the school day or for things like that, like that's okay. But public outdoor recreation use still has to be primary, and it has to be available. The site has to be available to the public at least half the time. So the grant application should discuss that schedule of the times that the facility will be available. And if the project is actually selected, we do require that signs be posted that make it clear to the public when the site is available for their use. And then from a competitive standpoint, the project narrative really should focus on how the general public will use and benefit from this project. The school's use and benefits generally do not increase the project score. And in fact, talking about that at length can actually detract from your proposal if it really comes across like that the students are the intended beneficiary, or that their use has the potential to be prioritized over the public use. So, so that's something to keep in mind. So, and another thing to sort of, we talked a little bit about the, the protection requirement. And so definitely this is something that we want schools to be thinking about, or communities that are maybe looking at partnering on a school project. Shared school recreation sites, in our experience, do have a pretty high risk of conversion. So you want to consider the anticipated growth of your community and that school's capital needs. So if the school has to expand, do they own other property where they can build that building, or are they going to be looking at the recreation area as the most likely location for a new school building or an expanded building? And if that's the case, does the school district have the ability to buy new land, that to meet the recreation replacement requirement that is not, not going to be for the school? So, so you really need to sort of think about the ability to address conversions in that scenario. And as we said, just adequate documentation must be provided in the application, indicating that the school, the school district, or whoever the the school partner is, understands these LWCF requirements and believes they're willing and able to comply. So now we're going to highlight a couple projects selected in the most recent round, round 5, and sort of preface this by saying that neither one of them are actually under grants yet, so it's still not final, but just want to sort of talk about why these were selected as just being examples of projects that had features that made them score well under the Orlp criteria. So the first example is one for an actual new park. It's a Sweetwater Park in Chula Vista. And this one was considered to be like it would have a high impact and be pretty innovative in that it used a former industrial site, that then became environmentally degraded. But it is in a coastal area, so it still has some potential. So under the grant, the Port of San Diego will be transforming this 29 acres into a new park, which will have 2 miles of hiking trails, nature-based play activity, wildlife viewing blinds, picnic areas, and and sort of be restored and kind of planted with native plants. And the area around the park that are were the target for this community did actually have pretty high poverty rates, actually exceeding 25%. So so the community was seen as particularly needy. Next slide, please. And I will apologize in advance on this one for anyone who did attend our session last Thursday, because we had accidentally misidentified the park. So apologies to both Springfield and Sanford. So anyway, but although the objective of ORLP is to establish brand new parks, a lot of applications we get are for, rehabilitation or renovation of a park that already exists. So this can be allowed, but again, the renovation has to be really substantial. I mean, basically equivalent to creating a brand new park. So, so this is an example of one of those projects. So it's Congressman Richard E. Neal Park in Springfield, Mass. So this is an example of a renovation that scored pretty well. And you can see sort of the before and after of sort of what it, what the park looks like right now and what they're hoping to get it to. So it'll be fairly transformed. And so, it'll have a lot of new features, including a splash pad, playground, picnic pavilion, trail, parking, all that kind of thing. And they're also actually working a little bit to improve the park's entrance and kind of the access to this project, although that's some of that work outside the park is actually not part of the grant, but they are going to do some work to make the park more accessible. The community in this for this park is known as Indian Orchard, and it is an economically disadvantaged community. And they were the target community to benefit from this park. So again, we just want to sort of capture this one last time because some of these changes really were significant. So again, leading with the one that Ginger spent some time on, that unlike the prior rounds, where there was sort of the pre-application and selection was to then develop the final application, all that's being consolidated. So there's just one round now, so that we can go straight to award. So that does mean a full and final application up front, and then the competition will culminate in actual awards. The two due dates, so again, this is sort of something different. So there is kind of this early bird deadline of January 31st, and then kind of the final deadline of May 31st. The 192 million is available sort of overall. There's not sort of a minimum per round. So really whatever is not awarded as a result of the January 31st round will be available for the second round. We did lock in the poverty rates. So, before 20% was just encouraged. Now that's the minimum. And I did see some questions about the 10%. And yes, in this case, we don't mean it's not a relative 10%. So it's not, 10% of whatever the city county rate is. It is actual like an overall number. So if the highest of, say, city, county, and state is 5%, then that means that the target community has to be at least 15. So it's plus 10 percentage points, not 10% of the number.
Except that 15% would not be high enough to make this particular round. It would have to be at least 20%.
Right. I want to just that was a question that we'll try to answer it again, I think, in the FAQs. But there was a question about the whether we meant 10% of the the other numbers and not 10% overall. So anyway, always a nuance that we don't quite manage. The maximum award is increased to $10 million. That's up from $5 million last year, but the minimum is still $300,000. The population being reduced to 30,000. And I do want to sort of touch on this, that the census, we removed the urban area requirement primarily because of the census not having updated its urban numbers, and we didn't want to force people to continue to base work off of 2010. But that's not to say that the overall kind of city/urban focus is meant to be diminished. So so I think while the goal was to sort of expand the community or the population or pool of cities that might be eligible, it's not sort of moving us away from kind of the city focus. And finally, the administration priority changing. So so much more focus in this round on natural spaces, green spaces that really sort of address climate change and things like that. So, so these are some questions that you might ask, of yourself about your project to see if ORLP is really the right program. And again, if it's not, formula funding might be something else for you to consider. So again, sort of is the park, located in a census tract, the target community in a census tract meeting the poverty minimum, or is it in a tract that only abuts or is not even sort of proximate to the census tract that meets these requirements? So an example is sort of in past rounds, we have found a relatively high number of projects that are located in census tracts that actually have a very low poverty rate, so not that poor. And then the economically disadvantaged community that's ostensibly the target of the project is located in an entirely different tract and maybe even sort of some difference, some distance away. So we're really looking for the for the park and the low-income community to be very proximate to one another. Can the target community access the park or site, or is the entrance only accessible by car or by walking a long distance or crossing dangerous roads? And so I think there was a question earlier about sort of where to measure from. So I think you might look at really sort of what it takes to get there. I mean, so a community that might be abutting the park but on a side where there's no actual entrance, and then they've got to walk all the way around. That's not going to be seen as accessible, and your site plan for your park should actually show where the entrances are and sort of make it clear how people would get there. Because if there's sort of questions about how reachable it really is, that tends to depress scores. We've talked already quite a bit about the sort of the park deserts, and would sort of refer people back to that slide with the sort of the different examples of how they can be measured. It really does depend on sort of the circumstances of your community, and kind of what's there already, and sort of it's on you to sort of make the case for sort of why it is a desert. But if there are a lot of parks already there, you better be able to explain sort of like why this doesn't, so there's access problems or sort of things like that. So even though a park is physically located there, it might not actually be accessible to the target community. So you don't want to leave reviewers with those questions. But do keep in mind that that when we're talking about park deserts, we really are looking at parks overall. A desert is not that there's lots of parks available, but they're missing a specific resource. So there's 4 parks, but none of them have a pool, and the project is to put in a pool. That's not the kind of park desert we're looking for. It's really sort of lack of recreation space overall. Sorry. So if it is a renovation, is the renovation sort of fairly limited? So is it only providing like-kind replacement of existing opportunities, or just adding one new recreation activity, as I was talking about? Or is it providing a park that would have the impact of a brand new park? So really looking to be able to increase the number and types of additional users served by new recreation opportunities. Was the target community engaged? So is it clear that the proposed recreation site meets the needs and wants of the target community? Many past proposals don't really document or demonstrate that any kind of public engagement occurred, or or there might have been public engagement, but the project doesn't reflect what it appears the public, what the target community wanted. So you went out and had all these meetings, and the community wants picnic areas and courts, and you've come back with I don't know, soccer fields and an amphitheater. Like if there appears to be a disconnect, that's something that the reviewers often pick up on. And then finally, is the project ready? I mean, with the change of policy, this is going to become a lot more urgent. It's sort of, we're generally defining that as, and this is actually a requirement of the Land and Water Program in general, including the formula program, is that the projects are supposed to be able to break ground within 1 year of the award of the grant agreement. So, so if you sort of think about that timeline and walk it back, I mean, that's going to sort of help define how ready your project needs to be. So, but in particular of things like, any of your planning, any of the design, if none of that's completed, the project is not ready for competition. And then another thing about that to keep in mind is because sort of projects are being selected sort of right to award, there's not a lot of opportunity to change the scope of work or the budget, particularly not after it's awarded. So so we also want your project well developed enough that it's pretty clear what you're going to be doing, and and you have a pretty good estimate of the numbers, because once the grant is under agreement, we can't really change it that much, or even sort of during the competition, because then there's always the risk that the project that we end up with is not actually the one that competed. All right, and the last set of slides is just to give people a little bit of perspective on the state formula program versus ORLP, and we want to just do that, I mean, both for kind of, again, to help people evaluate whether or not ORLP is really the best fit for your program, but also for people who are familiar with the formula program to keep in mind some of the key differences between formula and ORLP, because some things that we do allow on the formula side are not provided for under ORLP. So, so starting out in terms of sort of eligibility, so both programs do have, public agencies are, and tribes are, and actually other state agencies as well, besides the lead agency, are the eligible applicants. But ORLP does in particular have this this requirement that it be a city of 30,000. So that's not the case for formula. Communities can be of any size. Poverty level, no requirements for formula program. I mean, sometimes states themselves have their own requirements, so I don't think there's anything too definitive out there like this, but for ORLP, the poverty level of 20%. Location, again, sort of no specific requirements for formula, at least from the Park Service side, but for ORLP, has to be within the, half-mile or 10-minute walk of the target community. All right, next slide. The park desert focus. So again, in formula, not necessarily the case. So we do have a lot of, well, even on the formula side, a lot of projects are more, are renovations of existing parks, but also some new parks. But for ORLP in particular, really looking at sort of getting to those areas that have no opportunity. Whereas on the formula side, some of those kinds of circumstances that were discussed previously, like, just doing, like-kind replacement or, sort of adding single new recreation features, that kind of thing is allowed in the formula program. The funding minimum and maximum, this is maybe a place where it's a little more distinct. So we do have the minimum and maximum for ORLP as we've described. In the formula program, the minimums and maximums are really sort of set by the state, and this is usually done based on the state's apportionment. So there's a formula through which funds, the formula funds are obviously so there's a specific allocation that each state gets, and then most of them set their grant sizes sort of based on that. They have been going up in a lot of states as the funding overall for land and water has increased, but admittedly, I think probably only California has something approaching a grant of this size. I think their max is about 7 million, but for a lot of other states, anywhere from 250, 500 million. I don't know if any, I think a couple states are like over, like maybe around 2 million now. So so that is something that you'll want to talk to the state about. Yes?
Okay, you dropped off there for a second.
Oh, sorry. Where did I drop off?
Just talking about California.
Oh, so anyway, yeah, so there is variability in each state. So that is, so I don't think any state has grants quite as large as, I'm sure no state has grants as large as 10 million, but I think some states do have grants approaching, $1 million or $2 million. But that is a difference between this program and the state program. Community involvement. Again, there might be some state-specific requirements here in terms of what states want to see in terms of engagement, but there's no kind of national standard for that. But for ORLP, it's really looking for the sponsors' engagement with the target community from the design, beginning at the design of the project, and that's something that the project is specifically scored on. And if there is no, either no engagement or no evidence of engagement that can be discerned, that will affect the state's the application score. Okay, and last slide. So the matching share, again, this is set in the Land and Water Act, so so it is the same for both programs. But we have from something that's different from past years is we no longer have the leveraging requirement. There used to be points if the cost share was something other than 50-50, so a bigger local share. That's no longer the case. But we do still, the scoring still favors projects that have non-public contributions. So in other words, any match provided by someone other than the actual project sponsor. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a large amount. I mean, even if you have 2 or 3 sort of small grants from other entities in your community, that still is is demonstration of support. So it's not necessarily about how much they give, just the fact that they gave something. And again, it doesn't have to be cash. It could be them donating equipment or volunteer hours, sort of things like that. It's really about demonstrating that that others besides you are engaged in this project. Limitation on the number of grants. So on the formula side, I guess I'm not entirely sort of accurate to say sort of there's no limit, but there's certainly, I think, because we have plenty of examples over the last 58 years of states getting multiple LWCF grants over time. I do know some states have limitations. If you have a current land and water grant, they don't always let people have more than one at a time, but that really does depend on the state. So that's something you'd want to talk to your state lead agency about. But within ORLP in particular, because of the kind of the underserved aspect, we're sort of really looking to be able to sort of spread the funds around a little bit. So so we don't allow more than 2 ORLP grants per site, and that could be for say a phased project, so a phase 1 and a phase 2, that would be okay. Or if it's just a project coming back and doing different aspects of the park development, although not necessarily in a phase, that might be okay as well. But after that, there's no limitation on applying for formula grants. So it's so you can always go to the formula funding after ORLP, but only just 2 ORLP per park. That's not a limitation for the community on other parks in their community. So so if you have 2 ORLP grants for one for one park, that doesn't preclude you for applying for an ORLP grant for some other park. Scorp, again, so on the formula side, it's really about the state's outdoor recreation needs and priorities. For ORLP, at least one priority of the Scorp, but then more focus on the competition priorities, ORLP in general, as well as the administration's priorities. And then finally, just in the conduct of the competition, for formula, the only competition happens at the state level. So the state has the lead in selecting sort of which projects they think that they want to fund. NPS doesn't make a final determination, or makes the final determination, but we don't generally, get involved in their process and be like, no, fund this one, not that one. Whereas, for this, it is sort of nationally determined, and NPS, or the panel in particular, makes the decisions about who's going to compete. So that's not a feature of formula either. So, okay. So I guess we have about 11 more minutes to ask. And as I said, I have not been monitoring the chat, so I don't know what else has been coming in. So Julie, help me out.
We have a lot of questions. First, I just want to say thank you, Elizabeth and Ginger, for that great presentation. That is a lot of detailed information. We do have some time, so we're going to continue with the question and answer period a little bit more. But first, I know that Stephanie with TPL wants to mention their new toolkit. After she mentions that, we'll continue with the question and answer. So go ahead, Stephanie.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julie. I really appreciate it. So just to reintroduce myself, my name's Stephanie Flynn, and I am TPL's Federal Grants Manager. And for those of you who don't know, TPL is a national nonprofit organization that works with communities to create parks and protect land for people. We're also huge advocates and supporters of the ORLP program. And since the program's inception, we have supported many cities in their pursuit of ORLP grants by providing technical assistance and guidance to make sure they are submitting applications for eligible projects with compelling data. So I'm excited to share with you guys that we are looking to broaden the reach of our technical assistance with this new ORLP grant application toolkit, which I think was put in the chat at the very beginning of the webinar. And this grant application toolkit is really geared toward any entity that is interested in either applying for or supporting an ORLP grant application, with the goal of making the grant application process easier, to really kind of distill the project eligibility criteria, although Ginger and Elizabeth have done a really great job of that in this presentation, just with, with like a checklist and other tools to use as applications are being developed. And this is the first time that we're really releasing these resources publicly, so we hope they're helpful to everyone. And also, since this is the first time we're doing this, we're very open to feedback and suggestions on how to improve that for the future. And finally, I just want to say and clarify to everyone that this resource is really intended to complement the notice of funding opportunity from the National Park Service. And all applicants are required to read the notice of funding opportunity in its entirety to really ensure that they understand the rules and regulations of the program. So yeah, just a compliment to the NOFO. But yeah, looking forward to answering any questions here. And you can find my contact information on the last slide or on TPL's website. So thanks, Julie.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. All right, I'm just going to jump in. We have a number of questions. I'm going to kind of just go through them. I guess if others can mute their phone, that would be great. We have about 5 minutes before I kind of do my little conclusion here. So let's see, Ginger and Elizabeth, are budgets evaluated based on regional cost of construction and prevailing wage rates in effect for that state? Whoop. Oh, no, actually, you can't mute because you have to answer the question.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Yes, sorry. Did I tell you to mute? Are budgets evaluated based on regional cost of construction and prevailing wage rates in effect for that state?
So are you, if they're referring to Davis-Bacon, Orlp doesn't require that you follow the Davis-Bacon Act, but certainly it should be comparable with other costs in your county, city.
Great. This is back to sort of how oh, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Sorry, everyone. Getting back to how the project, how much has to be in the completed phase. Getting ready to begin, do you have to pre-award project costs? How far does that go? Design development, construction drawings?
So we're because of the need to make awards at the end of the process, we are saying that the applications need to come in a form much closer to what what we would do for the formula program. So so we are assuming that the design is already done, and that the construction plans are probably somewhere like the 30 to 60% range. I don't think it has to be all the way, but I mean it needs to be sort of pretty far along, and that and then separate from that, that compliance with the coordination with the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, if permits are needed and things like that, that those kinds of things would be already sort of initiated. I mean, the Park Service does finish most of those processes as part of the compliance process, so it's not like it. So we're not saying that all of that has to be done by the time the final application or the application comes in, but it does have to be at the stage where we can finish that process during the 7-month review period.
But just also a note that project planning costs, like for design and development, can be charged as pre-agreement costs, but they do have to have been incurred within 3 years prior to the signing of the grant. And the state can help you determine which are.
It's really important point out. We have a lot more questions about the matching grant, and I know that you've gone over it, but this is very important, and a lot of people, it stumps folks. So does the matching grant need to be exclusively private, or can they be a mix of city, state, foundation, private funding?
It can be a mix. It can be all city, or it could be all partner and private matching share. It's just that applications that include matching share from non-public resources are given priority. They score better.
Great, thank you. Can one city submit 2 project applications?
Yes, as long as they're for different parks, they shouldn't be submitting 2 projects for the same park.
Okay, good. Is nature education considered a form of recreation? That's kind of a hard one to answer. We're not quite sure what that means. Yeah. We're gonna move on. What is the definition of trail? Sometimes they cross roads and include some road beds.
So I mean, depending on the kind of trail it is, I mean, we understand that it might include sort of crossings. So that's, I mean, that's not isn't not okay, but we can't pay for, you know, expenses that would be, say, in a public, you know, a public right of way or things like that. So so if it's more of a sort of a transportation cost, those would have to be left out. But I mean, we understand that, you know, trails, if they're, you know, running from point to point, may actually have to cross streets and other things.
Can't be exclusive there. And back to trails, are bike to schoolway pathways allowable if the pathway is open to the public?
So just a trail leading somebody to a school, is that what it's saying?
Yep.
I mean, the school is not a recreation area, so that would be a transportation corridor. So it doesn't sound like it would be something that would be allowable.
Okay.
I mean, for trails, we're really looking for recreation being the primary purpose. So.
Right, right. This is going to be my last question because I have to do a conclusion, but before I say this, and I know that Ginger and Elizabeth have gone over this before, but I just want to make sure that everyone here, if you're interested in applying, you should really get in touch with your state LWCF officer, because again, this goes through the state, and the states all have different deadlines. Some have deadlines that are really quick, and others have much longer deadlines. These states are dealing with a lot of different urban grant application processes, including stateside. So I just would really encourage you all to get to know your LWCF stateside officer and let them know that you intend to apply for a grant and then start that partnership. Would an urban farm establishment or habitat restoration qualify under this program, assuming all other eligibility criteria are met?
So, I mean, really, again, really looking for public outdoor recreation as the primary purpose of the project.
Right. Okay. All right. So again, in the interest of time, that was our last question, and you are welcome to contact Ginger and Elizabeth directly, or again, contact your state liaison officer. I just want to thank everyone for joining our call today, and for Ginger and Elizabeth, again, for giving an excellent presentation on the Orlp program. We hope that you have found this webinar helpful. I'd also like to mention a few upcoming CPA programs that you might be interested in. On September 28th, we'll be hosting a member-exclusive peer-to-peer conversation about utilizing park rangers to enhance user experience and safety. On October 25th, we'll be hosting a 3-hour workshop on driving change through leadership and collaboration. We offer workshop discounts for CPA members and teams. And lastly, we'll be hosting an in-person park study tour in Austin from November 3rd to the 5th. Great time of the year to head to Austin. You can find more information and register for these programs by clicking on Events tab at cityparksalliance.org. You can also check back to the page for future webinars and other events. To access these programs, as well as our resource library, job bank, and discounts to our biannual Greater and Greener Conference, which will be held in Seattle in 2024, please consider becoming a member of CPA. Visit cpa.org/join for more information. And now I just want to say a big thanks to our sponsor, presenters, and attendees for helping to make CPA's webinar a huge success. Please take a moment to fill out the short evaluation that pop up after your session concludes. And thank you again for joining and for supporting our nation's urban parks. Bye-bye.